The American Historical Association makes this case, it's a little bit broader than just defining plagiarism, but the expropriation, fancy word for taking or using, of another author's work, and the presentation of it as one's own, constitutes plagiarism and is a serious violation of the ethics of scholarship. The Oxford English Dictionary defines plagiarism as the action or practice of taking someone else's work, idea, etc., and passing it off as one's own, literary theft. Now it seems to me that while these two here on this slide don't specifically say deliberate versus unintentional, or intentional versus unintentional, it seems to me that they're kind of leaning towards the deliberate side. Right? The action or practice suggests deliberation, right? Suggests somebody actually doing something versus something accidentally happening or happening without the knowledge or the consciousness of the individual that's doing it. So, in thinking about these definitions, what are some of the similarities that you see in how these various groups, various organizations describe plagiarism? What are some commonalities?
Uncredited.
Okay. All right, so there's the uncredited nature of it. What else?
Negative.
All right, negative. What else? Okay, in most cases, at the very least, it's deliberate across all of them, but Purdue is that. Yeah. Yeah. So for Purdue, you can do it unintentionally, but everybody says it's something deliberate. So some of the things that I noticed was first the emphasis on the use of or the taking of, and that it's not something that coincidentally happens. Right? Now again, it can happen unintentionally, but it is still something is being used, something is being taken from one place to another. And specifically, of course, that is the idea of someone else's work. It is not just kind of in the ether, I happen to use a set of similar words to somebody else. Right? I've taken someone else's work and used it. But that work could be one's writing, or it could be one's ideas as well. Third is the emphasis on presentation. Right? So if I use somebody's work, take it, and use it in my own life, write it down in a diary or a journal or something like that, no big deal. It's then the presentation of that work, right, in a paper, for example. Right? That's, now we're moving here to plagiarism, right? So I use or take something from someone else, and now I'm presenting it particularly as my own. At any step along this way, plagiarism can be avoided. Right? If I don't use or take something, right, I'm not going to plagiarize. Right? If I'm not involving someone else's work, I'm not going to plagiarize. Now again, if you did that for a paper, your paper's not going to be very good. You might end up with an F anyway. But you're not going to be plagiarizing. It's not an F for plagiarizing. Right? If I don't present it, I can avoid plagiarism. But obviously, you have to write a paper. But if I don't present it as my own, then it's not going to be plagiarism, right? So in all these definitions, there are ways to avoid plagiarism if one pays attention to these kind of things. So we have here, of course, this difference between deliberate and accidental plagiarism. To me, I believe in accidental plagiarism. Like I said, if I believe it's accidental, I would take that into account more than if it looks like it's deliberate. But I do believe that if you take someone else's work and present it as your own, you have plagiarized. Again, it can be unintentional, but you have plagiarized if you do not give them credit for it. So, what would deliberate plagiarism involve? Well, first it would involve just not citing someone else's work. And so I'm just taking things and I'm not putting in quotations, I'm presenting it as my own words, I'm presenting it as my own ideas. So I'm just not citing. That's one way you could deliberately plagiarize, hopefully not giving anybody any ideas. Secondly, you might involve yourself in what's known as a paper mill. And there are places on the internet where for $9.99 you can pay to have a paper that somebody has written on a specific subject. Right? That's deliberate plagiarism, because you have actually had to engage in several conscious decisions. Right? First, I'm going to look online for a paper. Second of all, I'm going to engage in a financial transaction with someone else for that paper. And then finally, I'm going to present that paper as my own work. Right? So there's several conscious decisions along that path. Similarly, instead of actually paying somebody for it, you could just take something else completely as your own and present that. Right? Finding something on Wikipedia, just copying and pasting. Somebody in your social club did a paper the previous year for somebody, and you're just submitting that. And so you could take something completely as yours, and so plagiarism can be something small, or it could be something major, as far as the actual thing, right? So I could just not cite a couple sentences, or I could just present an entire paper that I got from someone else or somewhere else. Accidental plagiarism, however, refers to, or can happen if you don't take notes properly. So if you're engaged with a source, always take notes, very extensive, comprehensive notes. So you don't end up accidentally getting a word, phrase, sentence in your head that you then put into a paper completely unintentionally. You think that, oh, this is my thought, but it actually was somebody else's thought. So take those notes properly. We'll talk about that in the later class. But, write down where it's from, for example. If you're looking through a commentary, or if you're looking through a website, or you're looking through a journal, make sure you have that citation information. All right, I got it from this place. Secondly, make sure that you put quotations around words or phrases that you're copying down. Right? And so this is what this author said, so I'm going to put this in quotations, so when I'm getting ready to write my paper, I know these are the exact words that were used in this commentary. Right? So not taking notes properly can lead to plagiarism. Not recording all the appropriate information. Right? So if you don't have the citation right, and so you have just a bunch of notes of things on your topic, but you have no idea what book or journal or website it came from, you could end up accidentally plagiarizing because you haven't. And then finally, something that you can no longer plead, ignorance. Right? People not knowing about plagiarism. It's unfortunate, but a lot of people these days don't recognize what plagiarism is, and so they can be encouraged to do one thing in high school and then get into college and do the same type of thing, but they've never been told, oh, by the way, that's not what you do. There are a couple different types of plagiarism as well, rather than just accidental and deliberate. Plagiarism can, of course, happen by copy and paste. Whether that's a literal copy and paste, or I have this book and I'm just typing down exactly what it says. And that's probably the main way that we think of when we think of plagiarism. Somebody's just taken wholesale what somebody else says and put it into their paper. That, of course, is a major form, but there are other forms as well. Things we've already talked about before: plagiarism by poor paraphrase. And so I'm not paraphrasing it enough, and so I'm plagiarizing. Now, of course, the difference is if I paraphrase and then cite, I'm fine, as long as I put in quotation marks what belongs in quotation marks. Plagiarism by poor citation. So I don't know how to cite, and so I just don't do it. Well, that's plagiarism. And so if you don't know how to cite, at least give something to the instructor so they know. All right, this is an issue I may need to instruct this person, help this person to understand citation, but at least they have been forthright and honest with me that they have used some sources here. So, why do you think people plagiarize? I didn't come up with a list. I found a list on the Council of Writing Program Administrators website that I think is a good list, and probably most of the ones will come up with. But why do you think people plagiarize? And don't worry, I'm not going to think it's you, right? I had a friend once. I knew somebody that. All right, but seriously, why do you think people plagiarize?
Procrastination, laziness.
Okay, procrastination, laziness. Why would that lead to somebody plagiarizing?
They don't feel like doing the work or putting it off, and they're like, well, I'll still find a paper, or I'll just go find a lot of stuff to fill in on paper so I don't have to do it all.
All right, so not wanting to do the work, not having the time to do the work because you've put it off. Why else would somebody plagiarize?
I'll say again, make it look like you can make your paper look really good. Like you could say, hey, I got this really sweet source or whatever, but it's not yours. It's not your words. It's somebody else's. Okay,
so trying to present yourself is kind of, I'm a really good student, or I'm really intelligent, right? So you're trying to pass yourself off with something you're not. Anything else you can think of that?
It's just quicker.
Okay, quicker. So here's some of the things that the Council of Writing Program Administrators said. They put at the top fear. Why do you think fear would lead people to plagiarize? What do you think they might mean?
I think if they do it on their own, they're not going to get a good grade.
Yeah, and so a lot of people engage in plagiarism because they don't feel confident enough in themselves and what they have to say, and so they feel like, well, if I find somebody else who's smarter or knows more and present that as mine, I can come off as knowing what I'm talking about. And so people become afraid that what they have to say isn't valuable enough, and so they plagiarize by finding something else. Secondly, of course, it's poor time management. That often is another reason that people end up plagiarizing. I didn't take enough time throughout the semester to do this, and so the paper's due tomorrow, and so I'm just going to. It's still plagiarism, whether you ran out of time or not. But that's a reason that a lot of people might plagiarize. For some, it's just a matter of, it doesn't matter to me. Plagiarism's not that important. It's not that big a deal. So I'm just going to do it. Now, usually that might be connected with one of these two other things, right? And so, it might not be the main reason somebody plagiarizes, but it might end up being because they don't see it as that big of a deal. It's not that important. Fourth, they might not have the knowledge about what plagiarism is, how to avoid it, and so that becomes a reason why some people might plagiarize. Again, that's probably more this this might be where we run into accidental plagiarism more. Okay? Now, in some ways, it's not completely, because just because you don't know that it's plagiarism, you still might know I am taking somebody else's source and putting it as my own, right? So you're still plagiarizing, and there's still a deliberateness about it, but you may not know that that's what that is. That's plagiarism. Right? And so you don't know when you hear professors talk about, oh yeah, don't plagiarize in this class. What's plagiarism? Okay, I'm not going to do that. So again, not something you can plead anymore. Now we've talked about it, so you're aware of it, but other people might do that as well. The other thing that also becomes common has to do with certain cultural differences. I have a friend who is a department chair of a sports marketing department at a state university, and they have had issues with several of their PhD students. All right? So we're not talking about undergrads, we're talking about these people are getting ready to become professors. Some of their PhD students plagiarizing their dissertations. Right, which is kind of like the end of your academic career, right, is getting that PhD. But what they're finding, I mean, it's still plagiarism, and they still have to deal with it, but what they were finding was that a lot of their international students were the ones doing it, because in other cultures, that kind of effort might not actually be seen as plagiarism, but might be seen as kind of a respect for what others have said. But it still violates plagiarism and still academic dishonesty. But the cultural differences about how you approach scholarship might lead someone to plagiarize. Again, it might be unintentional or accidental in the sense that they didn't intend to do it, but it is still a possibility. Now again, probably not something that will affect most of us in this class, and especially now that we've talked about it. But that sometimes happens, and so thinking about these writing programs, one of the things the administrators came together and said is, well, sometimes there are cultural differences that happen.